Welcome back to Mindkind Podcasts. This is Dr. Jo North returning to our platform. Mindkind continues to be a reflective space for anyone who wants to stay sane in our demanding world. Our intention is to inspire, motivate, and inform people of all ages interested in mental health and well-being. I'll be drawing on 35 years of practice as a psychotherapist, and we'll be looking at research and therapy along the way and talking with other experts in the field so we can draw on their skill. If something affects the mind, we'll be talking about it. So let's get on with today's podcast. Hi, welcome back to the Mindkind Podcast. This week I want to tell you all about working with conflict in relationships. In my work, a lot of what causes people mental and emotional pain is the relationships that they experience and the conflicts that they get into. And this is about human behavior. If you're alive and if you're living, you probably will have experienced some strife or some struggle in relationship. And I think the key is really knowing how to manage strife and struggle that is inevitable in relationships. When you think about it, we all have different minds, we're all going to have different opinions, and we're all going to have different ways of thinking about things. And the important thing is that we're able to share those thoughts and feelings, and that we're able to understand, and particularly able to listen to one another. And what happens is that we get caught up, of course, in thinking that we're right. And we love to be right. And I think being right is a wonderful thing, but it does cause a lot of problems. For example, one of the first keys to anger management is to remind people that they probably get angry because they think that they're right. I remember using the model of A Course in Miracles from way back in the early 1980s. And one of the common phrases was, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And there's something to hold in mind that if you want to hold on to being right, that's okay, but it might not make you very happy in the end. And the fact is that you may be right for you, but you may not be listening to everybody else. So this week, I'm going to be talking about this theme of our interactions. And if you're alive, you're usually interacting, unless you're avoiding that, in which case that's another difficult thing to think about. But I'm going to talk about the strife and discomfort that we feel in interactions and the way that that can seriously affect mental health. So here we go. One of the first models of thinking about communication that's often used in my work is the Karpman triangle, which stems from the 1960s, like many of these models, introduced by Dr. Karpman, in which he talks about the drama of interactions or daily life. And he describes three ways that we can be in relationship. The first role that we adopt is that of the perpetrator, or the person who is going to activate the problem and be very judgmental and very right. And they're going to be loud and confident and perhaps shame others. The second role would be the victim to that behavior, where somebody adopts a role of feeling that they are the scapegoat for somebody's problem, that they're going to lose, that they feel very, very frightened. They tend to withdraw, and this is, the victim position, if you like. And then, of course, the third position for any drama to occur, so we've got the perpetrator and the victim, would be the rescuer position, which is the person who turns up and they are always going to put the problem right. And they're going to work really, really hard to be helping everyone out. And the problem with this particular role is, of course, that you're going to expend a lot of energy. You may make yourself really miserable, and it can be the cause of a lot of anxiety when, of course, things don't go right. So we can't necessarily turn up and put things right all the time. So the point of this triangle is that we're going to adopt one of these positions. You might like to be mindful of, well, which position in any particular drama would you be adopting? What we need to do really is turn these roles around so that a perpetrator perhaps, or somebody who activates the problem or is seen to activate the problem, perhaps could be seen as a person who's needing to be powerful and to make changes and to instigate something different. Perhaps we could understand them as needing to express power. The victim, or the person who feels that they're being put upon in this situation, can feel that they're vulnerable in regard to the perpetrator, but need to communicate with them. And the rescuer can be mindful that they need to perhaps adopt a position of more rest than rescuing, and that they need to just be part of a positive interaction that communicates well-being to everyone while a particular problem is solved. Because it's for sure there will always be another problem. Problems will keep turning up, and that's part of what we do in our lives. We wake up, we solve the problems, and we try to have a good life. I mean, that's essentially what's going on. So here we have one model which helps us, the Karpman. Well done, Dr. Karpman, for his triangle, which is very ancient, really, but still serves us today in terms of what role do we adopt when there's some conflict or strife in relationships. One way that I like to think about our lives is that, in fact, we are communicating to others all the time, whether we're silent and withdrawn or whether we're noisy and very, very involved. We're actually communicating our lives. And it's just the style of communication that really, really matters. One really helpful model was the Morabian rule, which talks about how much of our communication is through words and how much is through tone and body language. I think it's very helpful to think about this. So he put forward the idea that 7% of our communication is actually the words that we use, whereas the tone of our voice and the use of our body language is 93%. That's it, basically. The body and the tone of voice are going to convey the communication. The words are only going to be 7%. So tone is about 38% of our communication and body language is 55%. So in total, the tone and body are 93% of what we are conveying. I think it's really, really useful because one of the things that goes horribly wrong in communication, say between parents and children or between couples or between work colleagues, is that tone of voice. And I always say to people, you can say really, really tough stuff. If you find the right tone of voice, you can convey a lot of good things like well-being. So in my job, I'm always giving feedback to people about their behavior and about maybe what they're not doing that's helpful. Now, if you're going to come across in a judgmental and hostile tone, you are going to lose your people. And if you find a tone that is more open and perhaps ask questions more than makes judgments, you're going to stand much more chance of a good flow of interaction. A particular hostile tone is the one that loses people. And what is on your face is going to really, really matter. So if your face is hostile and you're feeling cross and angry, probably take a step back and don't communicate whatever it is you want to communicate. Go away, maybe write it down, talk it over with someone and get it clear in your mind before you actually get in there. Because people read your face quicker than anything in a split second. That look on your face that says, I'm going to get you now, that the perpetrator might have, is going to be read and absorbed into that other person's central nervous system in a split second. We are that fast at understanding people's faces. We have to be, because maybe we need to protect ourselves. And you remember that most of what we do in life is about keeping ourselves safe and in a comfort zone. So get that face great and get that tone great before you even start to work on the words you're going to use. Here's a really, really important rule: face, body, tone. Get that one and you'll be going in the right direction. Another really helpful model is the assertiveness model, which was developed after the Second World War. And my goodness me, when people had to be re-empowered after the dreadful events of that global crisis and the dreadful harm that came to others who were persecuted. So the assertiveness is a really old but really, really useful way of thinking about communication. And I have found in my work that helping people to be assertive when they are feeling very unhappy about communication can make a transformation in their lives. And it's a gradual, ongoing process. So I learned about assertiveness in my 20s and it really transformed my life. And now, sort of 45 years later, I still constantly learn and think about being assertive as a way of communication. And often, if I find there's a problem going on, I say to myself, what is it you need to assert here in order to put this right for yourself? Now, let's get clear on this because assertiveness is not aggression. Okay, assertiveness is the ability and the right to express your thoughts and feelings, whilst others have the right to express theirs too. And I think that's what I teach so many times in a week is you have the right to express your thoughts and feelings, but you have to hold in mind that others have this right too. And I teach this to children, teenagers, and adults. And that is true of life. You have to respect the rights of others. It's not that you can just go around asserting your rights. Yeah. Now, and this is where perpetrators tend to go wrong, or the initiators of problems. They tend to go wrong in that slinging out their opinions with great confidence, which is great, but they're forgetting to take into consideration the thoughts and feelings of others. So start from there and you'll be doing well. So get clear on what your thoughts and feelings are. Sometimes people might express thoughts and feelings that are so opposed to your thoughts and feelings, or perhaps even not even very learned or very well informed, but they, maybe that means a good conversation with them about different types of thinking or different aspects of information in the world. So assertiveness is not aggression. Equally, in assertiveness training, we teach people that passivity is a very nice position in life because we agree with everybody. And there's nothing easier than agreeing with everybody. But ultimately, it's going to get you in a corner because there are times when you have to assert your own position. So passive people are extremely agreeable people and probably have a lot of friends until one day they get really mad and really angry. And they usually are people who struggle. If you're excessively passive in your life, you might find that you struggle with mental health in that you'll have a lot of internalized strife and a lot of internalized conflict that you keep to yourself that actually is going round and round in your mind and making you pretty unhappy, that can ultimately lead to some of the anxiety and depression that we see in people today. So passivity, sometimes yeah, let life go over your head. Sometimes, yeah, say yes to stuff. Sometimes, yeah, let it go. You obviously, absolutely. But then make sure that you are communicating your own needs and thoughts and feelings. Otherwise, ultimately, you will be, people will spot your passivity and you may be taken advantage of. It's not a comfortable position in the long run. In the short term, it might be quite a comfortable place to be. I see this a lot in parenting. Passive parenting, ultimately, you are going to end up with angry kids because kids need to be engaged with. They need to be told. They need to feel your presence. They need to feel limits. They need to feel boundaries. They need to feel that exchange of energy. That's what they want. They don't want your passivity. And ultimately, they're going to think you're not engaged with them if you're being excessively passive. Yeah. So no means no. And let's talk about why no means no could be a really great starting place. Or let's talk about different thoughts and feelings. The other style of communication is the passive aggressive response, which is when people perhaps have felt that they cannot voice their opinions. And I think that's very true in life and absolutely understandable that perhaps there's certain people or certain groups of people who have felt oppressed and have felt they cannot express their views safely. And that has to be borne in mind. But what might occur, and is something to keep an eye on, is that passive aggressive response where you actually communicate through your behavior. So you might sort of, for example, go out of the room and slam the door. If you're really angry with someone, you won't say anything, but you slam the door. And the slamming of the door is the passive aggressive act. So it's the act that actually communicates. And I think that's easy to do. And we all will have done that. You slam something down, or we don't speak to someone as an act of passive aggression. And what you have to remember is that not speaking to someone is actually a communication in itself. Okay, it's fine to step back and say to someone, if you don't mind, I'll speak to you later. But just to sort of, I think the common term is ghost someone is actually an act of passive aggression. It's being aggressive, but being seen as okay. It's very confusing to be on the end of passive aggression because people actually always want to know what is the communication? Could you ultimately communicate with me? So those are the three stances of assertive communication. So there's aggression, which is, won't work in the long run. It will work in the short term, as opposed to being clear, assertive, and accepting the rights of others, as well as accepting, acknowledging your own needs and rights. There's passivity, again, will work in the short term, and maybe sometimes that's useful, but ultimately in the long term, you need to be clear about your positioning, and you need to be able to make a stand for yourself and do it in the right communication style. Or there's the passive aggression where you act out because you don't feel able to communicate. That's a really important position. If it's not safe to communicate, then that's absolutely fine to acknowledge that. But what do you need to do in your life when things are not safe to communicate? So either way, it requires some thought to put these things right. And it's helpful to be mindful. You may find that you adopt a particular stance. You may be the constantly aggressive person. You may be the constantly passive person. You may be the constantly passive aggressive person. Get clear on that. It's okay. Just a starting point. Which position am I taking? And does this work? Or you may have all of those particular roles available to you and think about, does this work in this particular situation? So assertiveness, always something to think about in communication. And while we're talking about models of communication that are helpful, I think we can hold in mind the transactional analysis model of psychotherapy. So transactional analysis acknowledged this concept that a lot of the processing of life takes place in our transactions with one another, in our interactions, or if you put it simply, in our day-to-day conversations. It's all about transacting. And so Eric Berne, many years ago, put this forward in his transactional analysis model, which is very well worn, but very, very useful in this day and age. And the very, very simplified version of that is what he said was, if you want to have successful communication, then go for a win-win. Always hold that in mind. Hold in mind that you can win this transaction and by putting forward, let's say assertively, your thoughts and feelings, but the other person can win too. And that's the magic. If you can come at any communication with that in mind, that you are ultimately, you do not have to be the victor. There does not have to be a victor and a loser in a transaction. Let the person win. And if we're looking at theories, Mel Robbins' fantastic podcast and her lovely new book called Let Them Theory, big shout out to her because she does fantastic work. So, she just says, let people have their thoughts and feelings, let people have their views, let people have their positioning, but make sure that you have yours too. And that's a lovely, lovely thinking about this positioning we have in life. So I really respect her work. It's super. So just let people be, and we're going to go for the win-win positioning here. Now, as opposed to this, if you come at interaction or a set of conversations and you decide, I'm going to win this and they're going to lose this, then all you're going to have is a fight on your hands. And if you love fighting, you go right on ahead. But personally, I find fighting, A, I usually lose, and B, I'm not very good at it, and C, it's kind of like takes my energy and it does not make me feel happy. But if you're, if you want to get into verbal interactions and verbal judo with someone, you go right on ahead. There are people that do that in this world, and we know of them, of course. Let them, let them be. You may choose not to engage. So if you're coming at this from a, I'm going to win, you're going to lose, then just expect the fight. If you're coming at this equally from the passive position of I'm going to lose, you're going to win, well, then, get your corner ready and get your cushions and fall asleep in the corner, because you're going to be miserable and you're going to feel disgruntled and you're going to have a lot of rumination in your head about how you could have won. And that's not a mentally healthy place to be. And equally, you teach people that their aggression wins, especially if you're a parent, by the way. We can't let children think that their aggression towards you wins all the time. So we want to win-win. We don't want to win-lose, and we don't want to lose-win. And of course, then Bern described for us a very useful positioning, which is the lose-lose model of working, which is completely, let's get in a huddle and let's get in a cluster and let's discuss how miserable life is and how helpless we are and how we cannot make any changes and how dreadful life is. We've all been there. I've done it. Sometimes it's, a bit pleasing for a few minutes. But if you've got the cluster going on of miserable life, you're in a lose-lose position. Think about it. Can't stay there forever either, because actually the whole dynamic of life isn't essentially in its core based on everyone's going to lose. Okay. So that's Eric Bern's beautiful model. Very, very simple, but it's a beautiful thing to hold in mind. And it stood the test of time, like all of these models. Do they stand after a certain amount of time? And these ones absolutely do. So one of the positions that I find that creates wholesomeness in my own mind, and I see in the mind of others, and actually is scientifically proven to have impact therapeutically, and in terms of our interactions with one another, it's the use of kindness. If you want to have a pleasing day, then find your kind mind. And as you probably are aware, my whole podcast here is based on mind kindness. And I'm very grateful to the work of Dan Siegel and Alan Sroufe, two professors of psychiatry who have studied the neuroscience of kindness and have actually said, if we want to make a good life with loads of dopamine and loads of oxytocin in our system, then kindness is the way to go. So, whatever your interaction is, do it with kindness and people will notice. Now, don't do it in a passively kind way. It doesn't mean to say you have to be a kind person and people will walk all over you. No, that's not okay. You can be really powerful, kind person. And that's the sort of person I love to see walk out of my therapy room. People who have an experience of kindness that is powerful. And that's what we need to be doing in our lives today. So, super work of Dan Siegel, who writes a lot about parenting and kindness. One of the things that I teach to children and adults and hold in mind for myself is that most of all, be respectful of one another. Sometimes we might not like people, and that's a given in life. We're not going to like everybody. That's okay. You can have your not liking thoughts. But what we do need to be is respectful of people. Sometimes we have to communicate difficult stuff. And that's fine, as long as we do that respectfully and thoughtfully of the other person, of the impact on the other person, then we can make as much communication as we want. So if you are angry or if you're feeling messed up by an interaction, remember, is this respecting me and is this respecting the other person? And if you can hold in mind respect and kindness as a general rule, you'll be heading towards great communications. Sometimes it falls over, sometimes I can be as kind as can be and people still really want to be horrible to me. It's just like, okay, I need to step back from that. And, I don't wish to tolerate people being abusive, but I can just step back respectfully and I can leave them to get on with their positioning. hopefully they'll pull through on that. With stepping back in mind, I really, as you know, I'm very much a proposer of Hayao Omar's work on nonviolent resistance, and he has got a global reputation on his incredible work to bring nonviolence to the world, particularly in relation to young people who may be violent towards other children or towards adults, and he has had such an impact, and his positioning is very, very simple and very, very clear, and is based on all of the principles that we have been pulling in here. But he says to parents to step back from violent interactions, to not engage with anything that is aggressive. So sort of de-escalate violence by saying, I'm not going to engage in this right now. We do engage in loads of communication, but we don't engage in violent communication. And he invites parents to step back, to be present in their children's lives, to turn up in their children's lives, and to be continually engaging. Because, as I've said, young people want engagement. You know, they might push us away, but they still want some engagement on that, and to act with authority. And I think if you take anything from the set of rules that people are giving us around communication, they're commonalities, they're different theories that have emerged from different countries, that have emerged from different eras, but they have this commonality, and it's called respect, and it's called kindness, and it's called turning up. And I think it's called, turning up for yourself, turning up for what is right, for what your values are. Let's face it, our deepest held values aren't usually around, I like to be mean to people, unless there's a big problem going on, which is a set of philosophical thinking that we might not like to think about some other time. But usually these values revolve around a great life and feeling good. And that involves around getting those hormones in our brain that are making us feel good. And that generally involves great interactions. Now, for me, that's been a lifetime of work, and I know it will continue to be. And on the whole, I think human beings have a lifetime of work around interactions. There are some great people thinking about this. So, I've already mentioned Mel Robbins, but I also would like to mention Jefferson Fisher, who is a lawyer, American lawyer, who has his podcast on communication, and he's incredibly focused on communication, and he is incredibly focused on great communication. Big respect. If you love the idea of thinking more about communication, do listen to his fantastic podcast. So that's me for today. I am talking to you about my favorite subject of communicating with people, and I'm telling you things go wrong. Things don't have to be perfect. Things only have to be good enough. Always give yourself time to think. Step back if things aren't going well. And one of my favorite expressions to help good communication is to say to people, I'll get back to you on that. And that is saying, I need some time to think about this. If it's a difficult communication, would you mind if I take a look at it and get back to you? Usually people say yes. Usually people want things to go well. So don't get in a fight, get in a dialogue. Take good care. We started off today thinking about conflict and the way that it causes mental strife and anxiety for us in our lives. And we moved on to thinking about communication skills and how that can really, really help in terms of managing conflict or managing difference in opinion and thinking. And there's actually a whole range of different tools to draw on. But essentially, they boil down to some very basic skills, such as being able to listen to other people and being able to lend yourself to their positioning. So different schools of thought would call that different types of behavior. And one way of framing that is to think of other people's frame of reference, the way that other people think about things. If I were them, I may do things that way, is what we need to be able to tell ourselves if we are struggling to understand somebody's behavior. if I were in that person's world, if I had that person's experiences, then I probably would be doing the same. And it's hard to pull ourselves out of reactivity, the kind of reactivity that arises when difference causes us stress or anxiety. But ultimately, if we want to help ourselves to calm down and regulate in a conflict and reduce the level of stress in the conflict, then that is what we are going to have to do. You could call that empathy. It's a really, really great way of thinking about it. It's a great way of saying there's an experience that we can provide to a situation that is going to make a difference. Empathy could be seen as sitting on the same train as somebody, enjoying the same ride as someone, getting on their ride with them. And it's a skill. And the wonderful thing about empathy is that you can learn it. You can develop that. You can spend a lifetime developing that skill. And if in your life you haven't been shown a lot of empathy, it may then be difficult to show that yourself, but it's not something that it's impossible to learn. It's very learnable. And my vision of the future would be that we are teaching that to children in schools. And coupled with that, we're teaching children to listen and to actively listen. I would say that in my work as a therapist over the years, the one skill that has served me so well and will solve problems and will help people in impossible situations is the skill of actively listening and engaging in a person's experience with them. So I really want to leave you with that idea that listening is a fantastic skill. And again, it's a skill that we can develop and learn over the years. And we will need it until probably the end of our lives. We need, the most delightful older people are those who lend their ears to younger people and who understand the position of younger people and understand the dilemmas of their lives. We have to be able to make it possible for people also to listen to us. We need to be aware that we're going to have to adapt to others and perhaps adapt to their style if we're wanting to connect with them. One way to open a conversation rather than close and cut off a conversation is a very simple way that I always hold in mind, and I'm always saying to myself in my work is ask a question. You can make a judgment, and that's the easy thing to do. And our brains will always be making judgments. Our chattering brain is always going to be saying this and that about what people tell us. And I think you need to be able to hold back on your judgment, suspend your judgment. And one way to do that is to ask an open question about the situation. So those are often referred to as the W questions, the where, what, why, when, and of course the H on the end, which is how. So where, what, why, when, how are quite useful, have stayed in my mind for many, many years. And I always say to myself, if you're not understanding, if you're finding it hard to understand someone, then give them the grace to ask them a question. Give them some grace to get in on the communication and give them the grace to get involved with what you're trying to think. And then you're starting to open things up for people rather than close things down. You cannot endure in a conversation if you're not, at the very least, making things comfortable for them. And one of the things that I have noticed in business and in companies and in organizational structure is there is this giving feedback tendency. And I think feedback is the meat of life. I mean, it's the sort of blood flowing through the system. We need to know what's going right and what's going wrong, very simply. And I think with children, very often we need to be able to tell them, well, here's what's going great, here's what's not going so well. If we don't tell people what is not going well, we can't expect them to change their behavior. Equally, if we don't tell people what is going right, we can't expect them to feel pleased with themselves or to feel that they're on top of things. So very simple equation, what's going right and what's going wrong. But what I find is that feedback can get quite toxic. It can be very painful to people. I have many people sitting in my room because they've been given feedback in the office, and that feedback hasn't been given skillfully. And I don't believe in this, wrap it up with something good. So we tell people something great and then we tell people something really difficult, because, people aren't stupid. They know what's coming their way. And so I think if we can think of areas that might need developing and talk with people about what they think are areas for development, then we'll be much more likely to connect with people and work with them, rather than this kind of feedback that leaves people feeling traumatized, shocked, rubbish, and bullied. And I think there's one thing you don't really want to be doing in communication is bullying people into behaviors. You will never achieve that. You won't achieve that with anybody. So in the end, bullies don't win out. In the short term, they might. And we're back to our assertive, clear communication. What makes a difference is just being open to the fact that we are all dealing with each other. And the best way to do that is with some sensitivity and with some thoughtfulness to the other person's frame of mind in order to achieve the goals in the end. So that completes our look at conflict and the need to bring in communication and the way that that impacts on our mental health. And it's a huge field, and I'll be talking to you about it a lot more in the future. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. Check out the next episode on our platform. Don't forget, I'm a doctor of psychotherapy, not medicine or clinical psychology. My expertise lies in the field of applied psychology through psychotherapeutic models of practice. This podcast is not intended for diagnosis or treatment of any kind. If you are concerned about your mental health, do consult your doctor, who will guide you. If you are ever in a mental health crisis within the UK, dial 999. In all other parts of the world, check your mental health facilities or turn to someone who will support you.